New citizens may soon be taking a revised oath of citizenship that reflects Indigenous peoples. The Liberal government is proposing to revamp the oath so that new Canadians make a solemn commitment to respect Indigenous and treaty rights for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Making that change to the oath was one of the 94 calls to action issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The question that we're asking is, what difference do words make? Riley Esno writes for the Toronto Star and Maclean's Magazine, student at the University of Toronto studying political science and Indigenous studies, and Riley's with me in studio now. Good morning.
Morning.
Also with us in studio is Mai MAZLOUM, former broadcaster from Syria who arrived in Canada 5 years ago. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you.
Tell me a little bit, Riley, about your reaction to this change in the oath and what the government is trying to do to reflect Indigenous peoples in this country.
Right. I had a bit of a mixed reaction to it, I have to say, when I first saw it. I thought that, of course, it has, I think, at the very least, a symbolic meaning, which is nothing that I could say is a bad thing. But I also thought it was kind of ironic that the government of Canada was going to be asking newcomers to Canada to respect Indigenous rights and treaty rights when the government is held up for thousands of land claims in the courts right now and not doing it themselves. And so I kind of was like, oh, the irony in that.
Do as we say, not as we are slow in doing, perhaps. The new wording of this oath includes this line: I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including the Constitution, which recognizes and affirms the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Aside from your initial ambivalence around that,
right,
is this the right thing to do for the government? I mean, if new Canadians are saying those words about the country that they are choosing as their own, what could that do?
Well, my hope is that it could at least have an important role in facilitating the opening of a conversation about meaningful responsibilities that one has when they are a settler and a non-Indigenous person living on these lands. I think that it has a little bit less of that meaningful impact that I was hoping for if there's not proper education and funding attached to something like this.
So just saying the words is one thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I think that this government has really been big on with their reconciliation conversations. Like the Truth and Reconciliation call to action that this references is number 93. And 93 actually says that it doesn't say change the oath. It says create a kit in consultation and in collaboration with Aboriginal people to create dialogue and education for newcomers. This is like a very, I think, narrow interpretation of what that actually means.
If you were to pull it back a little bit and see it with a broader interpretation, and I want to get to May in a moment, but what else would you want to see? What would that kit include, for example?
Right. I think that the most meaningful relationships and the best things that you will learn and the most impactful way to learn about Indigenous people on this land is in relationship with Indigenous people. And I think that it's one thing for the government, there is a responsibility for the government of Canada to do things like change oaths and provide funding, but I think that education has to come from Indigenous people themselves. And so I would love to be able to see more collaboration with newcomers to Canada and Indigenous people and learning about the land and their responsibilities as settlers.
May, you came from Syria 5 years ago?
Yes.
Before you arrived here, what did you know, if anything, about, take a look at one of the big issues concerning Indigenous peoples in this country, the issue of residential schools. Did you know anything about that?
Yeah, before I came to Syria, I learned a lot about the Canadian history because I'm interested in learning history. Yeah. So I learned about the Indigenous people and I know about the residential schools. But when I arrived to Canada, I saw more than this. Like what happened to me, it was disappointing to see that there are still Indigenous people who are living in a very difficult situation here in Canada, where the first human right was created here in Canada. So the first manifest of the human right was created here in Canada, and we know that it is a free and democratic country. So it was a kind of disappointed disappointing to me to see that they're still living in difficult situations. And I saw a lot of reports regarding the kind of life that the indigenous people. I saw it. I watched on CBC. So this is a kind of like you feel sorry. And I had this little window to see closely how they are living, because my brother is living in Caledonia. So it is not so far from
Six Nations, you're right there, just in southern Ontario. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not so far from the fancy houses of the Canadian. I saw Indigenous living in trailers and in a very poor houses. So I felt sorry for them, because they own the land and we are living on their land.
What do you think saying a different oath will mean? And an oath that reflects those treaty rights, the obligations, but also the presence of Indigenous peoples on this land?
Yeah, I respect this decision, and I believe that it should be done long time ago, and it is an oath, like what it does mean to me, but it's still words. So I respect everything that Canada did to the Indigenous, like the first apology to the former student
of the
made
residential
by
schools.
Ottawa in 2004, and the recent apology from the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to the Inuit.
But you see that there's much more to do.
Yeah, because action speaks louder than words.
What's it like for you to hear that?
I would echo your sentiments exactly. And I think that that's also how I'm feeling. So thank you for sharing that with me. But I would say that, again, those words are great and symbolic, and sure, symbolism and symbolic acts of change are nice. But the impact that actually has for Indigenous people on the ground, I think, is very minimal. And so if we're going to actually meaningfully engage in reconciliation, and if the government truly wants to, then we have to start thinking about more impactful, actionable, potentially and probably uncomfortable ways of doing that.
True.
I wonder, when you take the oath of citizenship, whether it'll be the new one.
Yeah.
That'll be a big moment.
Yeah.
We'll chat again perhaps when that happens, because it is quite something. In the meantime, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And Riley, thanks.
Thank you.
Riley Esno is a student at the University of Toronto studying political science and Indigenous studies. Mai MAZLOUM, former broadcaster from Syria who arrived in this country 5 years ago, talking about the idea of a revised oath of citizenship. What would that mean to you as a Canadian, as a newcomer, as a member of First Nations, Métis or Inuit peoples here in Canada? Call the Vox Box, 416-205-5807.